Hello and welcome back to ABW in Conversation with. My name is Kris and I am your host. This is my third recording in 4 days. Some would say podcast haul. Others would just say professional. You take your pick, listener. I'll let you decide. My guest today, what a fabulous young man this guy is. Look at how much he's blossomed. I remember him when he was a young whippersnapper with hair far worse than mine, if that's possible. And now look at him. He's a fine hunk of a man. My guest today is Mr. Simon Collings. Simon, how are you, sir?
I'm very good, Kris. I'm slowly melting in the English heat, which happens about 3 days out of the 365 in the year. But when it comes, boy, does it get hot. And boy, do we like to moan about it, even though we moan about the rain and the cold. But other than that, I'm all good.
Yeah, very much so. I was saying the same to Tom yesterday. It's like we have that mini heat wave, and yeah, we all look forward to it, and then we just spend our entire time moaning about it. We're not good with heat in the UK, are we? But dear, I can imagine all of our American listeners now tuning in, going, 27 degrees? You haven't been born. But yeah, for us, that's hot. Anyway,
we're not set up for it. We got no fans, no air conditioning.
No, that's very true. Actually,
really not prepared.
We don't have aircon, no, especially not where I work, but that's a story for another day. Right, so like I've done with Tom, and like to a lesser extent than Danny, because obviously everyone knows who Danny is, but I wanted to have a chat to you about a little bit about you, first of all, and then we'll kind of progress into a bit of casual chit-chat about football and Arsenal and all that's in between. So for anybody that doesn't know you, shame on them, first of all, but you came on board with ABW. Tell us a bit about your journey, like when you came in, who got you? Because I can't actually remember how we discovered you. Technically, we're taking all the credit. And then, of course, you're now working for the London Evening Standard, if I can speak, which is, I mean, generally, hats off to you. You've done a fantastic job. You've made a career for yourself. And I think you've stayed very humble as well, which is a rare kind of combination of things in the modern world. So tell us a bit about your journey and how you found us, how we found you, and all that's in between that's got you to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, interrupt me at any point if I suddenly start going off on a big tangent. But I think I first started listening to ABW. I think it might have been when you guys first started, which I think was 2012. I think I remember Danny saying when you were chatting to him the other week. And that was going into my last year of university. And it was probably around the time when I think Twitter and the sort of podcast world was just starting to grow and the interaction on it. And I know you used to listen to the pod, pretty religiously, sort of week in, week out. Enjoyed the sort of diverse views it had. I think that was a time when Jeff was probably one of the first ITKs that we sort of had that are now pretty defunct in the modern world. You'd hear some interesting news and probably listened to it for about a year. And that was when I just finished my undergraduate degree, which was ancient history, which is a bit far from where I am now. And I went in to do a journalism, masters in sports journalism after that, and started doing my own podcast then a bit. And I think I just got chatting to Danny online, which is what I think seems to happen with anyone involved who gets involved with ABW. Danny is always up for a chat. He's always keen to talk to people. I think he'd heard a bit of my own podcast that we did at uni, a sort of Premier League one, and just ended up coming on the show with a few of the other guys who started doing blogs, which OG Jeff started. We had our own sort of bloggers show where we chatted about things we were writing about, and it sort of grew from there, really. In terms of ABW, I've done less so as work has dictated in the years gone by, but yeah, they were sort of first guys who gave me an opportunity to go on a podcast, which is harder than people think. I think from the outside listening, they seem to be quite easy podcasts and editing them, working on them. But having edited one at uni and then being on ones as guests, they are actually difficult beasts and sometimes can be a lot more challenging than people realise.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. I remember, now you've said it, actually, I do remember you having the uni show, and now it's all coming back to me. Yeah, I do remember how that came about. So from there, obviously, like you touched on it there, you've gone now into the fast-paced world of modern sports journalism. Before we sort of delve into what you literally do on a daily basis, what made you go down that route? Because like you say, ancient history, journalism, sports journalism, very far apart. Ancient history probably would serve Arsenal fans quite well right now. I think we probably all agree with that. But what was it? Was it just your love for football and sport? Because you cover a variety of sports as well. It's not just football, should be said. So was that what led you down that path, or was it just the first opportunity within the journalism sphere that you could grab?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was younger, probably like most, I think a lot of sports journalists, a lot of people, I wanted to be a footballer. And you get to sort of 13, 14 and you realise, yeah, this isn't happening. And the next best thing for me was sort of realising, you could write about sport, broadcast in it, and be involved in the sporting world. And I sort of, from 13, 14, I'd set my ambition and my aim was to be a sports journalist. And gradually was working out how do I, what is the next step on the ladder to get to where I want to be. And the advice I was given was sort of do, a solid base degree, a writing-based degree, and then get your journalism qualifications after that. So I chose ancient history. And as someone actually, to be fair, when I was moving into work in journalism, I remember an editor when I was doing work experience saying, well, it's actually not the worst degree to do, because you're essentially getting a load of different sources. You're justifying what a good source is, what a bad source is, and you've got to try and come to a reasoned, balanced argument at the end. So that was something I hadn't thought of, but I sort of landed on my feet there and that. And then I moved into doing a year in sports journalism, and quickly sort of realised, did a bit of print work as part of my degree, did a bit of radio work, bit of video. And as I was getting towards the end of the course, I was lucky enough to do some work experience for a company called Hayters, who I think you've probably seen them on Twitter now. They're an example of how the sports business has shifted. They're an agency who traditionally over sort of 50 years they've been going, they would service newspapers. Originally they would service magazines. Then they moved into the broadcast world and would service TV companies all around the world. And now a big part of their business is on YouTube, where they've grown a channel to over 200,000 followers. It's the main revenue stream for the business. And they've very much adapted over the years. And they gave me an opportunity to do some work experience right at the end of my degree, which was 2014. I said, come in for 2 weeks, do a bit of work, and that finished, and I got offered a job off the back of that, and went pretty much full bore into reporting and working, and they were a great place to start, because it wasn't so much of doing one particular thing. I did so many different things, and I was very much thrown into it. So I was writing bits for one of our clients. We did sort of stuff for magazines in Japan. We would do stuff for a newspaper in Ireland. We would be doing, a big part of our work was filming press conferences, trainings and interviews, where you'd essentially be a one-man band. So I'd be filming the interview, doing the interview, editing it, sending it. And I was given the at the time looked like a bad gig of Leicester, because they'd just been promoted to the Premier League in 2014. And they said, right, you're the new guy. You can do Leicester. None of us really want to go up to there. It's a bit of a mission to get out. I live just north of London, so it wasn't too bad for me. And so you can do them. And I started doing them that 2014-15 season, and they were doing predictably bad, near the bottom of the table. And then they, of course, had the great escape with Nigel Pearson, and the famous ostrich press conference, and they stayed up and all. I was starting to think, this is quite a good club to cover. And then, of course, Ranieri came in the following season. And I think there's a tweet that Neil often digs out of mine, where I went to the first game that season and said, yeah, this quite like the look of Leicester under Ranieri. I've got them finishing 15th this season, should be fine. And we all know what went on to happen. But that was, my second year of being a qualified journalist. And I lucked out by covering probably what is going to be, go down as one of the greatest stories ever. And I was mainly doing it as a sort of broadcast journalist, but towards the end, we had a newspaper client in Ireland who I was doing a lot of work for from it. And it became, I remember, originally going there, there'd be a group of sort of 3-4 camera men and women who I knew, who we'd sort of see each week. And then by the time we got to the end, the room would be absolutely packed. You'd have crews from Denmark, you'd have Japanese film crews, French film crews. Everyone had come over for this story in Leicester. And I just stumbled on my feet, and a lot of journalism is that you're just in the right place at the right time. And I covered them a bit in the Champions League for that season, and was loving it. And I stayed with Hayters all the way till January 2019 was when I left them. And then I sort of left off the back of doing the Arsenal tour in Singapore, which was 2018. I didn't go to the World Cup that year. I basically was deciding whether to go to the World Cup or go and do something different. And I said, I'll go do the Arsenal tour in Singapore. I'll generate enough work through our clients, and ended up doing some work covering the tour for the Evening Standard. And off the back of that, impressed them, and they made an approach for me to move. So that was when I left Hayters. But yeah, an amazing opportunity. And the things I did then, obviously I covered Euro 2016, and we're going to talk about the Euros, and I'll touch a bit on the difference between doing that and the Euros this time. And yeah, since being with the Standard in 2019, started out there just doing Crystal Palace and Watford for 6 months. Again, I had a bit of luck because Watford went on their run to the FA Cup final, which was a brilliant thing to cover. Started doing a bit more Arsenal in my second season, just as helping out James Ollie, who then moved on and is now at ESPN, and I was given the chance to do Arsenal full time from pretty much just after the pandemic hit. So it's been an interesting time covering the club. I got very excited when I was covering them because I thought, brilliant covering Arsenal. We're going around Europe, lots of different stadiums, countries. Pandemic hit, so couldn't travel, and they're now out of Europe. So the luck has dried up, I think, for the moment. But yeah, I mean, that's where I've got to today. Absolutely brilliant. I completely appreciate how it's probably, so lucky to do a job like that. And there are times that every journalist will tell you where they think, oh God, I'm really up to this. But particularly the pandemic for me, and I was furloughed for sort of 9 weeks, and not working did make me realise, like, this is this. There's a reason why I wanted to do this all along. How lucky I am, and I think having fans back now has reinforced that. And I can't complain at all about the job I do, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Talk to me a bit about the pandemic then, because obviously it is something that we've all lived through, and I appreciate this podcast will hopefully hang around for a while, and people may end up stumbling across us in 3, 4, 5 years, or 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it may be, and it will still be in people's mind. It's still in the history. How did the job change? Because one minute you're sat in front, like you say, you're sharing a room with hundreds of different people from different backgrounds, different countries, different languages, and you're interviewing managers and players, and you're getting the body language, you're reading the room. If somebody asks a question, I've seen it in press conferences before where a certain question's been answered, and the manager you just know there's that look and there's that body language. On Zoom calls, you don't really get that. So, I mean, how has it been different? And have you got things in place now that you never would have dreamed would be the case? Like, do you foresee your job changing in the future as a result of this pandemic, and how we're dealing with it on these sort of weird environments of Zoom calls, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting when it hit, and because it completely changed certainly the way that the news cycle would normally work. For football, it's normally quite easy to sort of plan your week, and in journalism we call it sort of diary events. So you look like, we know we're going to have Arteta on a Wednesday, we know we've got a game on a Thursday, game on a Sunday, so you can sort of plan how you're going to fill the newspaper, what's going to come. And when everything stops, you suddenly have to completely think about, like, what are we going to do here, because this is unprecedented. There's essentially nothing going on. So I think it changed the way people reported on things. I think it made people think outside the box, and it made you try and look for different stories to write about, and try and approach things in a different way. And I think also it sort of put a reliance on your contacts and people you can speak to, who you can interview. And I think it also, from one point of view, is how it made if you were trying to get hold of someone, it is normally notoriously quite difficult. As I think journalists will tell you, trying to get hold of some contacts. When the pandemic was on, it was understandable that there's nowhere else they can be than sat at home. So they're not answering their calls or their texts. You don't really know what they're doing. So I did think it made, and also when you couldn't meet new contacts, it's, as you say, it's very important when you meet someone, you can get the body language, you can grow a relationship, and having to do everything virtually, I think was very hard to try and cultivate and meet new contacts. But I think it has helped for some things. I think some clubs will keep doing certain elements of their work on Zoom because of the ease of it. I always think for an interview, or particularly if it's a sensitive subject, I always prefer doing it face to face and being in the same room as someone, because as you say, you can just get the feel of something, the vibe of the situation. I think sometimes for a press conference, though, the ease of being able just to get the entire media onto Zoom and do it over Zoom does help, particularly if it's something like 7 o'clock at night, European press conference, to be able just to have everyone buzzed into the room and do it like that, I think can be quite easy. So it's going to be interesting this season what happens, because currently in England, the restrictions have gone. This is Freedom Day, apparently. So in theory, from next season, press conferences could return to normal. But I wonder whether there might be a sort of hybrid, which we saw a bit with England in the Euros, where they had some journalists in the room, sort of maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, who did a sort of test or, were socially distant, and then had more journalists on Zoom to beef up the numbers. I can't, even though we are apparently in Freedom Day, I still can't envisage having this packed room full of journalists right now. I think there'll be some sort of compromise, just because we're seeing, the instances of even now in pre-season friendlies being shut down because squads are getting outbreaks, and it seems a bit of an unnecessary risk for clubs at the moment to have people coming onto a training ground, onto the site, and possibly getting cases spreading. But we'll see. I think hopefully it will get back to normal eventually. But I personally aren't massively against things being on Zoom for press conferences and stuff, because I think it does sometimes help with travel and bits and pieces. But there is nothing like being sat down one-on-one and doing a proper interview.
Yeah, agreed. Give me, if there is any, because we can't make these things up. Have you had one funny experience you can share since the pandemic kicked in terms of Zoom, or somebody who left a mic on that shouldn't, or maybe buzzed into a room when they weren't quite ready at home? Has there been anything that you can think of that comes to mind?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I had one. I've witnessed some, and I've had one. I mean, I had one this morning. So I was doing a little bit of rugby, which I sometimes sort of help out my colleague at the paper, who's mainly the cricket and rugby guy. And when you sort of sign into the Zoom, as most people probably know, you sort of it naturally sort of leaves your mic unmuted. And this one journalist goes, he says, "Yeah, I'm just on another fucking Zoom. I've just got this like back-to-back Zoom. It's a fucking nightmare." And then just suddenly the mute goes and it clicks off. I mean, everyone's been there. That is the thing with Zooms. You can. It's not like a normal meeting where you're sort of bouncing around. You can be back to back to back because you're not going anywhere. You're staying there. And there was another famous one which I always remember. You could probably find it on Twitter or YouTube. But Mourinho was sort of listening to a question from one journalist's press conference. He's like, I couldn't really hear him. He's just like, I can't hear what you're trying to say. And the guy's, "Oh, sorry, it's just my washing machine going off in the background." And it's just those sort of moments. They've become sort of normalised because I think everyone's just got on with it. But there isn't a single press conference that goes by without either the manager or the press officer going, "Yeah, you're on mute. No, you're still on mute. Okay, we'll come back to you later on." They just, even 18 months in, we're still struggling with it. But it's all part of fun and games, and I think people are just used to it. Yeah,
something that us podcasters know all about: recording the wrong things at the wrong time or not hitting play. And we've been doing it for years. In terms of when you've interviewed as well, I appreciate you probably can't name names here because I don't want to slander anyone. But do you find that when you talk to professional footballers, managers, or other professional sports people, do you find that there are some that are notoriously hard to deal with? I mean, you mentioned Jose Mourinho there. I think we all have our kind of views on what he's like, but I'm led to believe that on the quiet, he's actually quite a charming and humorous chap. It's just that he plays this persona, which we all as football fans go, well, he's a bit of a knob. And I almost feel like that's part of his footballing style, isn't it? It's like there's no way Pep Guardiola is as regimented at home with the dishes out of the dishwasher as he is in training with Man City. So I'm sure there's a bit of a persona and personality and how they have to come across to their players. Is that a fair comment? And have you sort of found that some players maybe that you didn't expect to be awkward have been, or had sort of strange demands maybe? Or have you found that most of them are pretty down to earth and kind of know that they've got things to do, media requirements fulfilled, for example?
Yeah, you get it. I mean, it varies from manager, player to player. I think Mourinho was probably, you've always had it in football, but Mourinho for me in the modern era was probably one of the first to really, be able to control and manipulate the press in a way of him sort of deciding what the line from this press conference is going to be. Like, what's the story going to be from Mourinho? And any journalist going to a Mourinho press conference knows if Mourinho says something good enough here, this is the back page of the newspaper. This is going all around the internet. And Mourinho will know that himself. He's Jose Mourinho. And there'll be times when he will come in there with a specific thing that he wants to get across. And he gets it in a sense that he is very different from the person you see in the press conference to the person he is in normal life. But a press conference is how you present yourself and portray yourself all around the world. And players too are different. And I mean, for me, he's not the most loved by Arsenal fans, but I've interviewed Troy Deeney a couple of times. I must say I do find him fascinating because he is so honest and open. There's nothing is off limits. He will answer anything. He will give you an honest answer, and he will tell it how it is. And that, as a journalist, is the most refreshing thing, where someone is just completely honest and tells you what they think. And it's similar for Ben Foster, who's at Watford as well, who is a brilliant bloke and someone I'm hoping to interview before the season starts again. He was one of the first interviews I did when I moved to the Standard. Just, absolutely loves life, lives it to the full. Will, again, tell you how it is. He's honest, he's open, and that's what you want. And I remember for him, for one of them, I was sort of chatting about when Javi Gracia was there and they had this fantastic run, and the big sort of thing was the fitness and the physicality of the team. And he's a chef as well. Foster used to be a chef. He was in Café Rouge for a bit, and we were talking about how they've got them so finely tuned and performing so well. And he was like, well, they are super strict in what they feed us and everything, how they prepare for the games. But to be honest, I'm the guy on the back of the bus with the sweets, with the cans of pop. I'm the one feeding it around, stuff like that. And the sort of press officer looks over just like, and he's like, and Ben's like, actually, don't put that in.
Don't put that in.
The fitness coach and the nutritionist will kill me. And I was like, okay. So he's like, actually, you can put it in if you want. I don't care. But that sort of stuff where that's what you want, is someone to be open, honest. And most players, if they've agreed to an interview, if they've agreed to give you their time, are pretty open, honest. I think a mix zone, which, we haven't had a mix zone, which for those people who don't know, essentially is after a game, you basically have an area normally whereby the team buses are, and you try and grab players as they walk past for 2-3 minutes. Players can be a bit different because it's quite a different environment. But if someone's agreed to do an interview with you and sit down and talk, it's very rare. You don't get a good and open sort of person. I think a good example, which wasn't an interview involving me, but I remember reading it. You can probably dig it out. Was an interview the Daily Mail did with Deulofeu before the 2019 FA Cup final, which clearly didn't go how the interviewer wanted it to. I think Deulofeu was a bit in a hurry to get away. And you sort of read the whole piece, and it's very cleverly written. It's not outwardly slagging off Deulofeu, and he still managed to get a piece out of it. But there's this subtle undertone of how Deulofeu didn't really want to play ball. He only wanted to be there for 10 minutes. And that's not really the game, and not really on. But that's a rare instance, I think, most of the time. If someone says they'll do an interview with you, they will give you their all, which I think is only really right.
Yeah. Well said. And biggest name you've ever interviewed? Just an off the cuff question there.
Biggest name I've ever interviewed. I'd probably say when I was working at Hayters, I got to do a sort of broadcast interview with Eddie Jones when he was the England head coach for sort of 10 minutes, which at the time was probably one of the biggest things I'd done. And it's probably the biggest one I think he's probably the biggest name that I've done. I mean, I've done various footballers, but me, myself, James Ollie, and two others did a round table with Saka towards the end of last season, which was great. It's always difficult to say. I mean, because sometimes my favourite interviews are people who aren't as famous, but you get a better interview out of them. And I remember doing one with Frank Kirby years and years ago. Actually, sort of soon after I started at Hayters, I did it for the Mail on Sunday. All about her depression and how she coped after her mum passing away and the impact it had on her. And playing sport. And that, again, she wasn't a huge name at the time. She is now a massive name in women's football, but that sometimes is more rewarding than interviewing a bigger name. It's the interview you get itself. So, it's a difficult one to answer that. But yeah, probably the name is probably Eddie Jones, I'd say.
Good stuff. Yeah, it's interesting because I would, of all the names I picked out of the hat, that wouldn't have been the one that jumps to mind. So that is really interesting. Talk to me. You mentioned Bukayo Saka there. It's kind of a nice segue because I want to ask you a little bit about the Euros. So you followed England, of course, as a fan, and doing your work as well in amongst that. How did it feel for you? Because it was a strange tournament for me personally, in that I'm usually very wedded to European tournaments. Like, I'm not a huge international fan in terms of like the friendlies mid-season and that. I find it a bit like it kind of kills the momentum of the club season. But when you've got a European Championships or a World Cup, I'm all about it. As many games as you can get back to back, eating all the wrong things, all the wrong times of night, and sharing stories with people at work about football all day long, and it's great. This year, I sort of felt a bit like there was games I enjoyed, and there was games I just found myself looking through my phone because it almost felt like there was just too much football. With what's gone on in the pandemic and that, and no fans and stuff, I just found it tough to really get properly into. And then as the tournament progressed, obviously, living in the UK, or in England, I should say, even as not necessarily the biggest England fan, I think it's fair to say, as myself, it did kind of wrap the country up a bit, didn't it? And it was quite a big. As it sort of gathered momentum, it became even bigger. I asked a similar question to Tom in the last podcast, and I'm intrigued to get your sort of both your head and heart situation here from a journalist point of view. What's the thing you take away from this Euros in terms of specifically England? Is it the scenes that we saw after the final and all the off the pitch business, and indeed the taking of the knee situation pre-tournament, or is it the actual generational talents, the seeming wave of optimism there is ahead of the next World Cup, and indeed what the manager was able to get out of those players?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult with England because of the way it ended. We can't ignore what happened on that final day, and I think it will. Well, it should really have an impact on whether England host the 2030 World Cup. And the world we live in, where social media can instantly share things around the world, and the image that was portrayed of London and Wembley, if I was FIFA or any other country, it's not a good one, is it? Fans breaking down barriers, storming the stadium. And someone made a point, I can't remember who it was, I think it was a journalist from the Times who sort of tweeted saying, purely from a safety point of view, if you're thinking, it's not so much. I remember 2016, particularly covering that Euros, there was this big threat of terrorism, partly because I think the Stade de France explosion happened the year before that. But from a terrorist point of view, you imagine someone could have easily stormed into that stadium then with a rucksack on, and you could have had a huge tragedy on your fans. So I really find it difficult to look past that, but perhaps because I want to, and I'm an optimist, and I'm someone who likes to look at the better side of things. I can't also look past the squad and everything they've done. You look at someone like Marcus Rashford and everything he's achieved, particularly during the pandemic, feeding so many children around the country. Even someone like Bukayo Saka, I think the level of maturity we've seen from him on the pitch, off the pitch, the way he speaks as a role model to young people goes throughout the squad. I think all of those players are immensely likable and really and are, just good human beings, people that you want to get behind and want to support. And that's almost what made the scenes and the distraction that they placed around everything, and the fact that the players were racially abused, and the fact it painted England as a country in a bad light, made it more upsetting because the squad and Southgate as well. I know I heard you talking to Danny about it, or might have been on another podcast. I think as a man, you can't fault Gareth Southgate at all in everything he's done, and particularly around the stuff of taking a knee, which was a big talking point before the tournament, of players being booed for doing it and politicians getting involved. And Southgate, I felt like he cut through all of that, and certainly to me, I felt like he connected to a lot of people, and he united a lot of people in something which threatened to be incredibly divisive during the tournament. I felt he spoke very good on it. So that is what I will take away, is we've grown to like a squad of England players, a manager. We've got new heroes, new role models, people that kids can be proud to look up to, people that parents can be proud their kids look up to. And hopefully that'll continue over the next decade, because there probably wasn't always a time when England were immensely likeable, and it might be part of the reason why you're not a huge England fan, or why, you know, I know other people aren't huge England fans. But I think looking at this group, I find it very hard to not like them and not root for them, even with everything that has gone on around it, like we say on that final day.
Yeah, I will confess there's a few England players I like. There's just quite a few I don't like, and there's something about trying to get behind the likes of Harry Kane that just doesn't sit very well with me. But then I do have that same dilemma following France and having Hugo Lloris in goal. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. Tell me a bit about the tournament, because how did you find that from a perspective just in covering it? And I'm guessing that you got to mix with different circles of journalists and different countries, probably some new names, some old familiar names. How was it to cover a tournament where we did get some fans back in certain stadiums? And then, of course, the Christian Eriksen incident, you know, in a year where we've had unprecedented events. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened on a football pitch, but to see it live in a broadcasting sense, I don't know whether you covered the story, but how did that sort of affect you, and how did you find that mixing with other journalists, like an event like that, and of course the tournament as a whole, how did it sort of go down for you?
Yeah, I mean, on Eriksen, first of all, I was working from home that day, and I was doing like a web shift, so I was just covering some games. I remember I covered the Wales game off the TV. We didn't send to Baku. Covered the Wales-Switzerland game, I think it was, off the TV, and then was writing up a piece off the back of that. And I had the Denmark game on, and I remember watching him sort of slowly stumbling forward, and then just sort of completely stopped what I was doing as he collapsed. And just found the whole situation. I thought it would impact me, but it impacted me in a far greater way than I realised it would. I was pretty emotional. I was actually crying a little bit watching it, and I don't know if it's because he's a very similar age to me, but the whole thing was so distressing. And there was a big debate, wasn't there, afterwards, about how long the cameras sort of stayed on the situation, panning round to pictures of his partner, the players forming the ring around him to shield everyone from what he was doing, and as he went off, and I think eventually they cut the BBC feed. I was just thinking, this is the tournament, it has to be over now. This is, you know, we can't go carry on playing football anymore, because it just doesn't really matter. It's not totally irrelevant. And then, I mean, they finished the game that day, which was absolutely bonkers. But from a work perspective, we were then all of a sudden all on the desk. Right, we need to react to this. We need to report on it. And it was credit to one of my colleagues who was running the desk, one of the editors, who was just sort of saying, look, we need to be super, super careful here, because there's going to be all sorts coming around. There's going to be pictures, possibly. There's going to be tweets from certain people saying this, saying that. And he was like, before anyone, you know, publishes, tweets, writes anything, you need to come to me first to give you approval on it, because at a time more than ever, you cannot be spreading fake news or something which isn't reliable, because we're talking about a person's life here. So, and he handled the situation expertly. And that was a very important thing that you had to do, was just, you know, wait for official statements from Denmark, from UEFA. Don't, you know, getting caught up in a situation that was very fast moving pace. So from a work perspective, it was a challenging situation, something I've never ever dealt with. And off the back of it, we still covered it through the tournament. Obviously, there was all the press conferences was done over Zoom, so you could do the media sessions with Denmark. And I also interviewed Justin Edinburgh's son, who people will remember was a Tottenham player, manager of Leyton Orient, who died of a cardiac arrest at the age of 49, and interviewed his son, Charlie, who's a fantastic bloke. And basically off the back of his dad dying, which was 2019, he set up the Justin Edinburgh 3 Foundation, which is the main thing they're trying to do is set up a thing called Justin's Law, where they want to make it the law in the UK that you have a defibrillator at every leisure centre, Sunday league, basically any sort of place where you're exercising. They believe it should be the law that there is a defibrillator to be used if it is needed, because at the moment it isn't the law in the UK. And then Charlie's dad, Justin, had a heart attack, cardiac arrest at the gym. The gym staff weren't sort of fully adept at performing CPR. There was no defibrillator. And at the age of 49, he passed away. So I interviewed Charlie a bit about that, but also about the work they're doing. And that was quite a difficult interview to do, because he was talking about, he was watching the game with his mum, sat next to her, and they're watching this scene of probably very similar to what happened to their dad. But it also reaffirmed to him how important it is, the work that he's doing. And it is something that I try to support whenever I can, retweet and push things out for them, of why he's doing what he is, and why I think Ericsson showed to us that, it can happen to anyone. And then I think the idea of having defibrillators in gyms and places where people exercise, I think feels like a law that should be in place, and hopefully will be going forward. So that was a big part of the tournament. But as a tournament as a whole, it was very, very different to a normal tournament. So Euro 2016 was the first tournament I covered, and for that I was based down in Nice. So I stayed in a little flat there for just did the group stages, and I was sort of hopping between Nice and Marseille, which was fantastic. Amazing experience. The stadium in Nice it's actually, I think it's still the profile, like header picture on my Twitter profile. Loved the stadium, really cool stadium. And Marseille as well, the Velodrome. Yeah, if you ever get an opportunity to go there, absolutely incredible stadium, proper old school, big ground. So I was going between those and did sort of 7 games, and really enjoyed the kind of atmosphere of having like a host nation and a tournament. Like the streets were bustling. Everywhere you went, you just got the sense that there was a tournament going on. And obviously we had games here in London, but I think the tournament lacked having a host. I mean, there's not a worse time to have a tournament like this than a pandemic, but I felt like it missed that feel of having, the hosts and everyone getting behind it, and everywhere you go, you can tell the tournament's going on. Speaking to people who went to Russia, even there in Russia, which is a vast, vast country, you still had that sort of feel. I think Seferin, the UEFA president, has come out and said, we won't do a tournament like this again. It's not a good idea. And I agree with them. I just don't think it had that proper tournament feel. I went up to Glasgow for the games there. So those are the games I was mainly covering. So I was going up to Hampden Park. And the atmosphere was good. I think they had 12,000 in there. In the stadium was 50,000. The Scots made a hell of a noise for 12,000. And yeah, the national anthem was brilliant. The atmosphere after the game's not so good because Scotland didn't have a great tournament, but they were good. They were good hosts. But again, it was a day rather than having the feel of a tournament being there for a month. So I think the football on the pitch was good. I think the quality of it was pretty high. I think the issue they had, you could see in certainly with some teams, struggled from having a lack of depth because I think of the sheer volume of football teams have played. The reason, England and Italy, probably the 2 best teams, but I think a big factor with them is they had the deepest squads. And when you're bringing your 6 players off the bench, if you've got the sort of quality those 2 teams do, I think that's why they did so strong. Whereas the stories of, your Ukraines, your Switzerlands, even your Denmarks, I just feel like they ran out of legs, quarterfinals, semi-finals, because the depth wasn't really there, and because the players are even more tired than they would normally be because of the relentless nature of the schedule because of COVID. Particularly, I remember watching the England-Ukraine game, and I went to the last 16 game, Ukraine-Sweden game up at Hampden Park, and Ukraine were running non-stop, and I looked at the stats, and I think they had run more than any other team at this Euros, and they looked like a good side. So I was like, they might give England quite a game here, and then I saw them against England, and I was like, oh no, they've just completely gone. There's nothing. They've emptied the tank to get here. but it was a good tournament. But I really missed having a host, and I think I don't think we'll see something like this again. You might, you can have two countries doing it or something like that, but the idea of having it all over the place really didn't sit well. And there's obviously the argument of everyone saying that teams were flying to, Baku and all sorts, and other teams like England just stayed in the UK for 6 games. So not the best idea from UEFA, but that's not always the case in UEFA, is it? So
yeah, we try things, but I'm with you. I think that's what partly took away from my not enjoyment, but it just didn't feel like a normal tournament because, like you say, it was so different, and it wasn't just I love that atmosphere, like you say, of it all being in one country. And the Qatar World Cup is going to be, talking to Tom about this, it's going to be very strange, not only being in the winter and half a season and then half the other season with the World Cup in between, but just the whole country, the way it's set up and the temperatures, and it's going to be really, really strange. I personally love a World Cup when the games are like in the middle of the night. I don't know why. There's something like about being back to when you're sort of 14 and you shouldn't be staying up to watch games. Or you might remember during the South Korea World Cup and going to the pub at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was just the most surreal experience. I remember watching England and Nigeria in that tournament and basically going to a nightclub at 8 a.m. and having a fry up and a beer. It's just the most weird experience ever. But yeah, roll on.
Weird kickoffs are like a novelty of World Cups, aren't they? They sort of go with it if it's kicks off at strange time. I suppose the next one is going to be Canada, Mexico, USA. So we should have a bit of.
Yeah, I forgot that.
So we should have a bit of that, which will be quite fun.
Yeah.
I was chatting and I was chatting the other day to mates, like maybe it's the nostalgia of it, but when you watch the old, I remember the Korea and Japan World Cup, and you're seeing like what sort of montage of ITV come up with here to, there's a very cheesy, like full of stereotypes montage about how we're playing in Asia and all this sort of stuff. And there, there's a theme around the whole tournament. And he just didn't really have that with this Euros. I think it was a good idea to give it a go, but I think we've shown that it's when you've got that one host, that's always the best, and particularly as well because normally you get the host, as we saw with England. I think the advantage of being the host is clear to see, and if you've got a team, I mean, OG would love it to be Canada, but if you get a team that somehow goes on a little run, then the whole feel of the tournament, when the host nation is doing well, it makes it even more special. So, yeah, I'm excited for the next few tournaments. I think look good to me. The Euros being in Germany, I think will be good. Yeah, Canada, USA, Mexico will be fun, and 2030 in England, I'm not so sure, but Portugal and Spain, I think, would be a pretty good host for a World Cup.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Even, I mean, if you take away all the human rights elements and everything that's wrong with the Qatar World Cup, I do think it'll be interesting to see what it'll be like in such a strange country. And I don't mean that in a negative sense of the word strange, but it is so different. There is so much money and these purpose-built stadiums and these fake clouds and all this. It's going to be quite an experience. So even that will be strange. And
it's going to be the last 32 team World Cup. So
oh yeah, good point. Yeah. And
I was looking at, the size of it, I think it's about 3/4 of the size of Northern Ireland. So, I mean, this is a small place that is hosting
a lot of people.
The World Cup. A lot of people, yeah. And I mean, there was sort of murmurings years and years ago. I remember that they might have done like a sort of golf World Cup and had some games in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia or something, which I think might have been a good idea. So just in that condensed space, it's going to be very interesting. And that will make it an interesting tournament, just because it will be so different to anything we've ever experienced. Yeah. And it feels like ages ago that Qatar got the World Cup. I don't know when it was, but I feel like we've been waiting for this World Cup for ages.
Yeah.
I think it's because they beat England to the bid maybe, but I don't know why. It feels like we've waited ages for this. So, and the fact it's come around so soon, I think is exciting as well. And having it around November, December time again, very different. So
yeah,
it's one to look forward to, I think, and intriguing to see how it goes.
Yeah, really weird. And I think we can all get behind the idea of the USA, Mexico and Canadian World Cup. I look forward to Kanye West stepping forward, Diana Ross style, and USA forward, blazing one over the bar from 6 yards. But we shall see. Of course, this is an Arsenal podcast, as its sort of title goes. So we would be remiss to not touch on all things Arsenal. So there's a couple of things I definitely want to get your opinion on in a minute that are specific subjects. But as an overview, let's talk a bit of pre-season. I was chatting to Tom about the 2 results in Scotland that we've had. They've not been the best results, but performance is encouraging. Obviously, some of our fans have gone off the deep end. Who'd have thought that would happen? But we have seen signings. We saw Nuno Tavares play and score against Rangers. Obviously, the defeat to Hibs wasn't great. We've seen Sambi Lokonga, sort of the great mythical creature that we thought was never going to get announced, finally get announced today. He's joined the club, and it seems, touch wood, like he's going to stay and not go on loan, which I think is a good thing. What have you made so far of pre-season and Arsenal? Because you are, of course, covering them. How have you felt about what you've seen, what you've reported on, the access you've had so far? Is it a positive, upbeat sort of club that is potentially going to return to something like top 6 status next year, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, they've got to bring back Georgian, the set pieces. He's got to get him back in there. I mean, a nightmare. No, I think pre-season is always it's a very weird one. Pre-season, I kind of feel normally it's a situation where if a team has a bad pre-season, it's a bit like the Community Shield. If a team has a bad pre-season, you go, oh, it doesn't matter, it's pre-season. If they have a good pre-season, you go, they look fantastic, they're going to hit the ground running. And normally it's somewhere in between, really. I think these first 2 games in particular were just about getting some minutes in the legs. We saw that by the number of changes that were made. Also the players involved, not everyone's with the squad who should be. And I personally don't really read too much into pre-season until you get to sort of right at the end of July and start of August. I think those games against Chelsea and Spurs will be a better barometer to have a look and see how the team is shaping up. I really feel like this first week where they've been in training for days is not something to lose sleep over. And fans, please don't lose sleep over pre-season games against Hibs and Rangers, because it is a long old season. And if you're pulling your hair out now, you're not going to be left by May. There were elements of the team that I thought looked good. I thought Smith Rowe looked excellent in both games. I thought Tavares, I was pretty impressed by, because there wasn't certainly from Portugal, there wasn't a big amount of hype about him. Didn't seem to be this mass swell of like Arsenal have unearthed this wonder kid. But watching him, he seems to have physically, I like him a lot, and athletically, I like him a lot. And I feel like he's quite a raw player who, if you coach him well, which Arteta can do with players, if you coach him well, I feel like you could develop him into a good player. And that role behind Tierney is so hard to fill, because basically, in an ideal world, Kieran Tierney just plays 38 Premier League games, so that guy's not really there to play. So there was always the debate of whether you signed a seasoned veteran as sort of Ryan Bertrand, or if you went for a young player who you moulded. And the rest of the squad, I mean, Aubameyang's come in for a lot of criticism. We'll find out if that's rust or something's gone wrong. I can't read too much into it. But these sort of pre-season games, the early ones, for me, are about getting minutes in your legs, and also about some young players sticking their hand up and showing their opportunity, because the likes of Maitland-Niles, Willian, other players who probably look like they're going to leave, they're sort of going through the motion here, because if they're going to leave the club, the last thing they want is to get injured. They're not really fighting for their place because they look like they're going. So it's a difficult one. I think we'll, as I say, we'll know more around August time, but there is a sense now that hopefully things are starting to pick up. I think getting Lokonga through the door before America was important to do. They've got Tavares in. Ben White, they're going to have to wait to do because he's on holiday. And they're going to need to sort out the goalkeeping situation. I think there's going to be a pressing one. And also they're going to have to sort out the attacking midfield situation as well. Because as much as I love Smith Rowe, I don't know if you can go a season with him being your number 10 and not having another option or someone to change things up. Well, I thought it worked well when Odegaard was there, and you could move Smith Rowe left, move him right, even if you wanted to. And then it's about getting players out the door. But you will know, particularly from following French football, there is very, very little money in the market other than in England. I don't think you would find anyone on the continent paying £50 million for Ben White or paying £50 million probably for any player. So they're going to struggle to get players out the door. And whether it's a case that they end up loaning a lot of players and saying, look, we'll take the fee in a year's time, as is the case with Guendouzi, Mavropanos, that could be the case. But I think the key will be, if they are going to loan players, that they get some sort of guarantee they're going to get money in a year's time, because they need to shift these players and they need to get some money in to try and get things moving.
Yeah, agreed. We can also exclusively reveal that Willian is in advanced negotiations with Islington Steak Bar and Grill at this stage. So we'll see how that turns out. Yes, agreed. Just on that sort of subject, you said about the attacking midfield. This is a thing that's dividing a lot of Arsenal fans. Just sort of on a brief aside, just wanted to get your thoughts on, if you had the choice, what would you do? Would you look to bring in two players for the midfield, one potentially who will sort of sit deeper and then one who will attack? Because I think it's fair to say that Lokonga feels to me a bit sort of Alex Song, in that there's a lot of potential there, and as long as he doesn't turn into a massive prat and go to Barcelona when he really shouldn't, and pick up trophies when he really shouldn't, but he feels like a project, a player that we may get something out of him, maybe even what Guendouzi should have been in principle. It might take him 18 months, 2 years. He might do a Fabregas and come in straight away. But if you consider him as the future, you've basically got Thomas Partey and Mohamed El-Neni in that holding sort of central midfield role. And then, as you said, Smith Rowe, Saka, Pepe in those three positions, Willian if he's still around. But I would argue there's probably room for two in that area. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, if you, I think you can have a slightly smaller squad this season because of no Europe. I think you can look at what Villa and sort of West Ham did, where you probably need 18, 19 senior first team players, and then you could probably have 3, 4 youngish players like your Ballagans to beef up the numbers a bit. But in midfield, yeah, I agree with you. Simply because of Lokonga was needed because of the bodies going out the door. Guendouzi's obviously gone. Treo will go. Maitland-Niles will go, I think. But he's one player, to be honest, I don't think it's going to happen. But if there was a way you could persuade him to stay and be a backup central midfielder, and sort of make him play the new El-Neni role, so be that backup utility sort of player, I would probably like to keep Maitland-Niles because he's homegrown. I think he's quite a neat and tidy player. But I think he's a bit like Willock, where he's had a taste of playing week in, week out, and he's going to want that. So you're going to need at least one for me in that sitting role. I think Partey plus a first team player. Lokonga, was reading his interview today on the club website, said his sort of best role is in a number 6, but he can play as a box to box. He can play further forward. And there was a good piece by Sam Dean of the Telegraph, who's done a big sort of background on. He's spoken to some people at Anderlecht. And they make the point in that Anderlecht to Sam that he is not the finished article. So I'm hoping fans will not put too much pressure on him, but he is raw, he is rough, he needs work. So in an ideal world for me, you have Partey plus one other, and then El-Neni and Lokonga, 4 centre mids for 2 roles, I think is fine. You've got Aziz as an absolute 5th if you wanted to. You could even push Ben White and play him there if you need to. That other role, that other central midfield role, I think is so crucial to get it right. Obviously, players being linked, Locatelli, Neves. I've seen some links to, I think it was a player in Holland the other day who was linked with it. You might know better than me, that I saw Drew was tweeting about.
Cooper Minus?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
So there's lots of names going in there. The Neves one I did get a lot because I think he's quite similar to Xhaka in what he offers. Didn't have a very good season with Wolves last year. But speaking to people who cover Wolves, they say that was a one-off, and normally he's been brilliant for them. And he's a leader, he's good on the ball, and would sort of fit that Xhaka role. I don't think fans, or probably Arsenal themselves, particularly like the idea of 35, 40 million. It feels like quite a lot, particularly when Locatelli's been spoken about at the same price. But that is a really important position for me, and who they get there is going to define, what this sort of rebuild is going to look like, because we saw how important Xhaka was. You look at the statistics, you look at the games he played, minutes, passes, a lot of things went through Xhaka. Like him or loathe him, he was the hub of that team. So that role is absolutely crucial. And further forward, I think you're fairly well stacked. Smith Rowe is your number 10. You need someone else there. Saka, Pepe on the wings. Willian looks like he's going to go. You've then got obviously Aubameyang can play wide if you want. Nelson, are you going to get him out the door?
Martinelli.
I think Martinelli, yeah. So I think ideally you'll probably play Saka and Pepe on the wings and Smith Rowe as the 10. But if it was me, I think I would be hoping and maybe seeing if there's not a way of trying to get Odegaard on loan again. I know seems to be a lot of talk about it was done, it was ended, he's gone back there, but I remember the same happening with Ceballos, and if there's a way of somehow getting him back, I think that would be a good move for me. And if you could get him on loan, that'd be a fantastic move, and then you can spend the money on the midfield. And then Maddison talk, obviously there, Aouar. I mean, you'll be best placed to me to talk about Aouar, but for the price, if it is 20 million, I mean, yeah, that seems great. But yeah, it's so difficult. I mean, who would you have as if you were signing the one centre mid to play with Partey? Because I think that for me is going to be the next big one they've got to do. What would you do there? Who would you go for?
I mean, I'm really torn because my heart says I would go for Houssem Aouar because he comes across as, to me, like this deal should have been done last year. And the only reason it didn't get done is because we tried to drive the price down. And Leon, as you probably know, Jean-Michel Aulas he's not a chap who takes cheap for his players. He will always try and maximise them. And I think the thought process was they keep Aouar, they get back into the Champions League, and they refund the team rebuilding. Obviously, that's not happened, and they've lost Memphis Depay. And Aouar, where they've gone wrong, I think, in trying to sell him to us is that because he had a few issues off the pitch last year. There was the notable when he refused to warm down after a game. He was then subsequently suspended by the then coach, Rudy Garcia, and I think that had a bit of a slightly unsettling effect on him within the squad. And I think that also might have contributed towards us not going back in for him heavily this summer because Arteta's very... As we know, he's very regimented. He doesn't like players who are going to cause any issues in the dressing room, if you ask Guendouzi, for example, or Mesut Ozil. So I almost think both Lyon and Arsenal have kind of drifted that way on that deal. But that said, he's probably the cheapest of the players we've been looking at and arguably has the most upsides because he can play as a 4, as a 6, as an 8, as a 10 even, or even wide left if you need him to. So I think he's got the most value, and he's probably the one that, if you look at, needs a refresh of club more than any of them. That said, I have come around to the Ruben Neves idea a little bit in that, as you say, he looks like a player who just needs a new club and a fresh start, and he has got the talent. But like you, I just don't think he's got 40 million quid's worth of talent. That's my worry on that one. And then my other big issue with this question is, I like you, would go for Odegaard as the 10. Because I just think he's a supremely gifted player. But I think we need a more defensive player, if anything, because people have this idea that Thomas Partey is a Gilberto Silva type, and he's not that type of player. Yes, he can make tackles, but he's a creative defensive midfielder. He's not a guy who's going to run around and, Coquelin and Gilberto and Petit and Vieira. He's not like that. That's not his game. And unless the manager's thinking about coaching him into a deeper player, I just don't think that's his role. And when he played at Atletico Madrid, like he had, what was the old guy's name before he retired? Was it Gabby? Not Gabby. Yeah, it was Gabby.
Yes, Gabby. Yeah.
Who play alongside him, and then he had like the Koke sort of link with him as well. He often had a player who would either, if not do the defensive work, would work alongside him on the defensive role. And at Arsenal, he just hasn't got that unless you play El Nene. So if I was spending the money, I would go with Aouar and Odegaard. They would be the two I would push hard for. And I would sort of say to Aouar, if you're coming in, yes, we want you to create. We want you to be, if you like, the Aaron Ramsey of this team, but you're going to have to work your balls off going the other way because I don't mind two creative, deeper players, but they've both got to work back. Like you can't have two caught upfield and you can't rely on, you can't say to Aouar, right, you can build us from deep, but you leave Partey on his own. You can't have that. And I think even Xhaka got caught on his own a few times last year where players just, everybody upfield, Xhaka on his own, and that made him look a worse player than he probably really is, even though I'm not his biggest fan, as you know, but that's just me. Two other questions I wanted to ask you before we wrap up. One is on the manager, because I think you're a fan, aren't you, of him? It's funny how we talked about Gareth Southgate being as a man and as a football personality and a football brain. Fantastic, speaks very well, comes across very well. To me, Mikel Arteta is very similar. He says a lot of things that I do sometimes rewind and go, you've said a lot of words there, but you haven't really answered the question, have you, Mikel? Which, certain other managers in our past have been very famous for doing. But undeniably, he's a very talented coach, and even as a slight doubter myself, I think that's very clear, and he's clearly got a lot of upsides. Where do you kind of sit on what he needs to do this season to silence the doubters? Because, an FA Cup would be lovely, of course it would, but do you feel like he has to do a lot more to silence the critics? Because it does feel like a growing number of people who, it sounds quite sad, but almost want him to fail now.
I mean, I don't feel like he's got very much credit in the bank left with Arsenal supporters. It's difficult to read it off Twitter because it's not the normal barometer you get when you go to when you go to games every week, and the atmosphere inside the stadium is often different to Twitter. And I think when you lose the stadium, that's when managers really do lose their job. So it'll be interesting to see as the season progresses how that goes. But for me, I don't feel as though he's got any more. I wouldn't call them excuses, but reasons for the difficulties they had. I mean, look at what these things cope with. We talked about the pandemic, talked about the Ozil situation, obviously Guendouzi, everything around Aubameyang, contracting malaria, the off-field issues. So there are a number of situations he's had that I feel like you give him the slack for and say, okay, we can understand that. But now this summer, he's going to have the full pre-season. He's going to have a full window. He will hopefully get the squad he wants, get the players in he wants, get the players out he wants. We saw the benefits in January when he got rid of players that he didn't want as part of the rebuild. So when we go into this season, I don't feel like there's any reason why the team shouldn't be performing. I don't think from the fans' perspective, probably the media's perspective too, he's going to get much slack and understanding if Arsenal get to November time and they're where they were this November. So for me, he's got to deliver this season. What that looks like, I think it needs to look like a season that West Ham had probably, or maybe Leicester, where I don't think you say to him you have to finish in the Champions League places, but you need to be in the race. I think Arsenal finished, was it 3 points off the top four? Maybe 4 points off the top four, but we were never really in the race for the top four. I think you need to get to sort of the 34th, 35th game and be in the hunt, be sixth and be sort of 3 points off the top four. And if you end up finishing fifth, sixth, so be it. But you need to put up a genuine race to finish in the top four. For me, that is what his aim should be this season, particularly when you've only got one game a week. And that, I think, will help Arteta because he is, as you say, a coach. And that is his probably biggest asset, is that his ability to coach players and make them better. As a manager, I still think he's got things to learn, particularly with his man management. And I think players sometimes can feel, I think he seems, from the outside, he seems to go hot and cold on players. I remember Maitland-Niles, was the flavour of the month for 5-6 weeks, and then he's gone from the team. Cedric, even last season, the flavour of the month. And then after that Slavia game, we don't see him again. And that can be difficult. And that, I think, probably an element of his side that he needs to work on the management side. But as a coach, I don't think you can really argue against his credentials, and particularly people at City talk about the work he did on the training ground with the players as being very good. And it's the same at Arsenal. A lot of those players have really bought into what he does. Kieran, Tierney in particular, Saka, Smith Rowe, these players are fully behind what he wants. And there are probably some similarities to Pep, not just because he worked under him, but also because I think the younger players, I think it's the same with Pep as well, really. They will buy into his philosophy. I think Pep in his career always seemed to struggle a bit more with senior, more experienced players buying into him. And I don't know if that's going to be the case with Arteta, but it certainly seems to be the trend that the younger players are fully on board with what he's doing and they are 100% going for it. And now it's about delivering that on the pitch. We've seen moments until that semi-final with Real. I actually thought he was very good in one-off games, particularly that FA Cup run. Then the sort of knockout games, he found a way. But that was the first time where I think tactically he got it wrong. He sort of overthought it.
He pepped it.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. Yeah, I just feel like he almost changed, and it didn't help, to be fair, in that second leg that Xhaka was injured in the last minute before warm-up, and he has to suddenly throw on Kieran Tierney. But I kind of felt like they moved too many pieces of the team to solve one situation. Like they took Saka out of central midfield to move him to left back, rather than just at the end, just biting the bullet and saying, right, we're going to keep everything the same, just put Saka at left back. Yeah. And I think towards the end of the season, we watched a couple of games, didn't we, where we saw that, and everyone was just like, that's
why didn't we do this earlier?
And I will forgive Arteta for that, because he's a rookie manager, and as a club, I think Arsenal do understand this. If you employ a rookie manager, they're going to be learning things and they're going to make mistakes. The key thing will be, next time this comes around, has he learned from it, and does he react differently? But on the whole, I, for me, feel there's enough signs to be positive. I think he's really trying to change the culture at the training ground. He is an absolute stickler for the rules, as we saw with Aubameyang. Dropping him from a North London derby. It's the same when he was a player. He was renowned as being the policeman of the dressing room. He was the one who laid down the door, which I think is incidentally why he quite liked Xhaka. Xhaka was that same sort of role. And also, Neves is very much in that mould, which is why I do wonder if they will go for him. If you speak to people at Wolves, he's the one who is the fine master at Wolves. He's the one who is absolutely on the discipline. And that is very much an Arteta player, so he sort of fits the bill there. And slowly but surely, he is changing the culture at the club. It's going to take time. I think he's got the backing from the club. He survived that run October, November, December time, didn't he? Yeah. And to come through a run like that and out the other side of it, fair play. Some fans will argue he could have been sacked at the end of the season. I think other clubs would have sacked him. But for Arsenal, you've gone down this route of going for the young manager, the big rebuild. I kind of feel like in the position now where you've got to see what's at the end of the road. As bumpy as it has been and as brutal as it had been, I think you might as well now just let's keep going. Let's give him this season. Let's see what happens. Because I think if you'd quit now, don't really think you'd fully given the chance of a project manager, a rebuild manager. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I, for one, would like him to succeed. I'm the same as you. I really like him as a person. He's very good to deal with for the press. Everyone you speak to seems to say he's a lovely bloke. So I would love him to succeed. But this feels like the season that will define his era at Arsenal, I think, whether it's a success or a failure, because I'm not sure if he has another, 8th, 9th place finish, whether he's going to get another year.
Especially not with fans in the ground. I think with the audio.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Final question then, which is along similar lines. Talk to me about Amazon. I mean, how do you see this going? And from a more, I guess, personal point of view, does it change depending on whether you're sort of on site or not, I guess? But does it change your sort of outlook on how you're going to sort of conduct your work in terms of journalism? I mean, are you going to be aware that there's going to be this constant presence of cameras in and around? And, do you sort of feel like, is there a reason behind this, I guess, is the question? Or is it purely about getting some money back? Because we've seen, I think, the difference with the Spurs one in particular, all jokes aside, we kind of laughed along because their season was such a shit show, and there was so many very cleverly edited bits where it's quite clear that there's a bit set up there. There was an element of drama. There has to be, because it's a show. Whereas the Man City one, I mean, they were successful, so there wasn't really much to mock, was there? Whereas with us, I just don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a great idea, I've got to be honest. But do you feel like the club have done this for more exposure, for more money? Or do you actually think that in a weird way, it might just be something that we look back on and go, that was a really good idea because we have a really good successful season and things come out of it for the better? Maybe it changes the dressing room, for example.
I'm so intrigued to see how this goes. As a fan, I think it's great because every fan wants to see behind the curtain, don't they? They want to, want to get any insight into the inner workings of the club. And of course, this is going to be a peek behind the curtain, but a slightly edited peek behind the curtain. I mean, financially, it's a very good thing for the club. There's no getting away from that. Tottenham, Daniel Levy, very savvy operator, knows what he's doing. Arsenal, I'm sure, would have been very well paid to do a documentary like this. But it is a risk because you are letting the cameras in. And for me, personally, I don't know the sums of money being involved, but I kind of feel like this is a huge moment in Arteta's rebuild. It is the season, it is the summer, and you're letting the cameras in. So it could be brilliant because you could document the season when Arteta banged and he turned Arsenal into, a top 4 contender, and they went on a brilliant FA Cup run. And that is fantastic because you've documented it all and you then show it all to the world and they go, oh God, this is fantastic. They've got this young, exciting, vibrant manager. They've got these young, likeable lads like Saka, like Smith Rowe. God, I want to support this team. Or you open the door and they go, oh wow, this is, they sacked the manager after 4 months and then, they got so-and-so in and that's the risk you take. So, I mean, it's a bit of a gamble, but maybe that's where Arsenal are as a club at the moment, that they need to do something like this. I mean, City did it again because I think City did it because they wanted the exposure of the City brand. But let's be honest, City are financially a big club and trophies-wise a big club, but as a brand around the world, they're still not your huge club. And this was an opportunity for them to showcase that. And they sort of knew they're going to finish first or second. I've seen all of the All or Nothing NFL documentaries, which are very good, even as I'm not an NFL fan. They are very good, though, but they are a much greater look behind the curtain than the football ones. So they did one with the LA Rams, which is Stan Kroenke's team. And in that, you saw the coach's speech to the players saying goodbye, like, I've been sacked, and you didn't get that with Spurs and Pochettino. It's just Pochettino's gone. He's left. The City one I found very polished. The Leeds one was even more polished. Leeds was different and wasn't All or Nothing, a different one. I mean, that you didn't even get anything in the dressing room. I don't know if that was Bielsa saying, right, you're not coming in the dressing room at all.
100%.
City did with Pep. City did with Pep, which I think is the benefit from Arteta. He will know what this is like having those cameras around. It could even be the same crew that did it. So that is an advantage. They will have. Arteta will know what it's like. And I can't imagine... I don't know. I can't imagine he will massively be involved in the sort of, the City one had a lot of cheeky Briggerstein. The sort of executives were sort of creating the narrative and weaving bits in, and there will be a start. It's the same as any drama, I know it's a documentary, but it is a drama, and you have stars of the show. So I'm so intrigued to see who is going to be the star of this show. The Tottenham one was obviously Jose Mourinho because it's Jose Mourinho comes in, you make it. Danny Rose, yeah. But I mean, that was some of the Tottenham stuff you saw. I mean, having seeing Kane and Mourinho's meetings, Danny Rose, that was some pretty intense stuff to get a witness of. And if you're the directors from this, I kind of feel like you feel like someone like Saka,
I was thinking that.
A likable person, Rob Holding, Tierney, these sort of characters, I feel could be the way that it goes. It will depend a lot on the form, but there will be, that's what I'm very intrigued to see, who is going to be the sort of person they weave around. And, the Sunderland ones, for anyone who's not watched, are amazing. But they are amazing from the car crash element to some of them, But even in that, and George Honeymoon, I remember the player in that, he's so likable in it. And Johnny Williams as well as another one who comes across brilliantly in it. But you watch bits of that and they are fascinating. And that Sunderland one, I love it when I think they're trying to get Will Grigg in and deadline day and the sort of, they're going back and forth, trying to agree a fee, all this sort of stuff. And I think they end up paying, might be £5 million or something. And Sunderland are a League One club. It's a lot of money. And, the owner's like, I don't know if I do it or not. And it even gets to the point where the manager's like, do not buy him. It is not worth the money. And the owner does it anyway. And you just see this insight into a club. But the Sunderland one gained supporters. They gained fans because they were invested in the story. And that is the way it happens with these. You do enjoy these teams. And I watched the NFL one and the Arizona Cardinals. I really enjoyed learning about them. carried on watching the games and stuff. So it is a huge risk to do it, I think, for Arsenal. I think it's probably an indication of where they are as a club that they need to do this documentary. And it's going to be so fast. I think it'll be fascinating either way, whether it's fascinating sat with your hands over your eyes or fascinating and you're comfortably enjoying it remains to be seen. But I mean, can you imagine them doing sort of last season deadline day with Partey and Edu trying to get that all over the line? It's going to be great. But I do wonder what's going to be left. The most interesting stuff, what's left on the cutting room floor and what doesn't get out and seen.
Or what leaks out that shouldn't leak out, maybe. And,
the probably the best thing for Arsenal fans and what should give them the most comfort is Arteta has done this before at City, even if he wasn't the leading light, and the Kroenkes have done this before with the LA Rams. So they're not going into this completely blind. They are aware what they are signing up for, and they will be hoping it turns into be a brilliant success, which it could well be if Arsenal have the dream season. Every Arsenal fan is going to be desperate to watch that documentary because how do we do this? How do we turn around? And fans around the world will suddenly be like, so it's going to be great. And as a journalist, for me, it will be strange, particularly if we're there at the press conferences and they're sort of filming us milling around and
eating sausage rolls.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping they'll be more focused on the actual players rather than us journalists. But even for me, thinking about like that, I wonder what it will be like for the players. But when you speak to people who've been involved in other documentaries, they always say that pretty quickly after sort of weeks, I think the players sort of forget that cameras are there and they forget it quite swiftly. But it's going to be I think everyone loves these documentaries, but they are quite, when it's your club, I think people are a bit scared of watching them.
That's exactly it. That's my worry.
The only one I haven't seen. There's a couple I haven't seen the Dortmund one. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah,
and I haven't seen the Juve one.
Also good. Subtitled, which is a bit of a takes you out slightly, just naturally, but yeah.
But the best one, I think the Sunderland one is if anyone's not seen, I think are the best ones.
There was one done at Sunderland. I don't know if you know this, but there was one done at Sunderland in the 90s before the Sunderland slide dive with Peter Reid. Premier Passions.
On YouTube.
That's it. It's on YouTube.
Absolutely amazing. That
the Peter Reid losing his mind part is just like you just see a man losing his marbles, don't you? It's like the famous stuff with Neil Warnock doing the same. It's just car crash to the hill.
I mean, those are proper. That is a documentary that would not be made now. Like the stuff they put out is. I mean, they sign did they sign Tony Coton, and he's basically. Or Tony Coton gets injured in pre-season, is absolutely crocked.
Oh yeah, the goalkeeper,
And then they sign this, or they're about to sign this like Israeli striker, aren't they? I think. And he comes over and he's absolutely riddled with it. Like it's just a terrible signing that they make.
Yeah.
And he's like, he costs like 100k, and he's like, I think he'll be the man to sort of keep us in the Premier League. It's like he won't be. He costs 100,000. He's not going to be the man.
It's not going to work. No.
And also the sort of. It is that is on YouTube, and if anyone hasn't watched that, go and watch those Premier Passions because they are fascinating document, and the access they get is amazing. I mean, they're very, very much in there with Peter Reid, but it's also they get into some of the fans, I think, when they're getting their season tickets.
Yeah,
and it's just proper throwback 90s stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like The Office, but in football, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's. There are some other 90s ones I'm trying to think the other ones I've seen. There's a Graham Taylor one, obviously the very famous one.
Yeah.
Impossible Job. But that Premier Passion one is actually sort of less well known. And I think it's because they've just moved into the Stadium of Light.
That's right.
I mean, it's the sort of way to that is an example of not how to run a football club. They basically get promoted and they're like, right, we're going to build this massive 50,000 seat stadium
that we can't fill.
That we can't fill, and we're going to spend 100k on this Israeli striker who's crocked to keep us in the division. But it's a great, and I'm sure from this there'll be some great sound bites. And I think hopefully there'll be players. Oh, I'm sure there'll be players that come out of it who we learn about that we didn't know about. And I think that was as bad as the Sunderland was for the car crash. It was. I do remember as I said, likes of Johnny Williams, George Honeymoon, these young lads who came across. You watched it like, oh, these are just really nice kids, really nice blokes. And it would surprise me if the directors of this documentary, I imagine they'll sort of 5-6 weeks film thing, but they'll suddenly realise like, right, who is going to be the narrative that we weave this around?
Yeah, get the squad list up.
Yeah, and it feels like something that you look at Saka, particularly everything that's gone on this summer.
Yeah, it's written itself.
It would be bloody nice if it was a redemption arc for him that we're all watching next summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I speak for all Arsenal fans when I say I'm really looking forward to seeing like Savlaka and Aubameyang and William doing a conga around the dressing room as we draw 1-1 away at Brentford or something. It's going to be, that's going to be a thing. Or somebody turning up late for a game on a moped, like El Nene arriving in a 3-wheeler, something like that. You just know
Aubameyang feels made for a documentary. To be fair, I mean, he is a showman. He is an extrovert.
Yeah,
he kind of feels like she should be. I know it's the same when we talk. I think performing in front of crowds and stadiums. He is somebody who loves doing that. So I do wonder what his role will be in something like this. But I think it's going to be. It's interesting. It's going to be exciting. And I'm nervous but excited to witness it. And then there'll be all these things that I remember when the Tottenham one was being filmed, there were all these stories that were coming out like the cameras have filmed, Pochettino and Levy sacking, and it's like the cameras have filmed this. It's like they might have filmed all this, but probably not going to see it. So
no, you're not going to see it. No, it's going to be interesting. Only other one I would highlight for people who like those kind of documentaries. I'm not a massive. I know you're a little bit more than I am, but I'm not a massive cricket person. I was back in the 90s, probably more so. But the one they did with the Australian team, which I can't remember what it's called. It's called like the test. That's the one.
Yes.
I was absolutely obsessed with that.
That was brilliant, wasn't it? Yeah.
Very few series or anything. Like the last thing I really watched with any sort of level of love was Dexter, and I watched that like 10 years after it was made. Most things I'm like, I'll watch 1 or 2 episodes and I'll just get bored and go and do something else, and I'll never get back to it. But that I watched 1 episode and I was like, I haven't really got the time, but I have to watch the next episode. And it was really interesting for probably a sport like you said with the NFL ones. I wasn't really that invested in it. It made me go, actually, I really like these guys. And like you said, the Sunderland thing with Johnny Williams when he had all those injuries, and it made me go, I really want this guy to do well, because his career was on the floor with injuries, and you just thought, I want you to do well. Whereas the Tottenham one, none of them came out of that. In fact, I just found it funny watching Son get injured. That's terrible, isn't it? But I did find it funny. I'm not going to lie to you, viewers. It's an Arsenal podcast. Who cares,
That Aussie one, that Aussie one was, that was done as in the wake of Sandpaper Gate. So when the Aussies were done for essentially cheating, and it was, to put it bluntly, basically a PR exercise, or to try and win back and present the country and the team in a different light. And it worked. It did. To have, I'm English, obviously, and a vast number of people I know are English, watched it and thought, oh, I actually really like the Australian cricket team. I shouldn't like them at all. But the way it was, you actually came across, and particularly Langer, who was the sort of coach, even a little small bit when I remember they sort of missed that run out in one of the tests and he smashes the bin over and all this rubbish goes on the floor, and then it cuts back and he's putting all the rubbish back in the bin because he made a mess in the room. Just little bits like that. You got an insight into them. And that was an example for Arsenal of how it can work and how it can create a really positive image and brand around your club. So that is a good example. And just speaking of documentary, the Last Chance You documentaries, I don't know if anyone's ever watched those, but they're on Netflix. And they are brilliant. They are absolutely fantastic. They are essentially junior college athletes, which is all trying to get to your big, Chicago, Harvard, all these. They're trying to get to the big unis, and they basically had to drop down to a junior college level because of they've mucked up in their life. They might have, been involved in drugs or bad grades. And it is a raw, fly on the wall documentary. And because it's junior college, and I myself and most people in the UK do not follow junior college. You have no idea how this season is going to pan out, but they focus on sort of 3-4 people, and it's a character documentary where you follow them through and you are rooting for them. You are absolutely praying that these guys, have a good season. They get their big move to university, and those documentaries, if anyone gets a chance, Netflix Last Chance for You, they're fantastic. So it can be a positive thing, and let's think positively. Let's hope it is for Arsenal. It's not the car crash that we fear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to put a live prize up available for our viewers now. The first person, this is I've just come up with this. The first person that spots Simon on the documentary, the first person to tweet us at the ABW account will win a prize, and it may or may not be a picture of Danny in the bath. So if that isn't an incentive, I don't know what is. So look out for him. Simon, where can people find you if they want to follow you or read your articles? Where can people locate you if they wish to do so?
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter at SR_Collings. And then all my work will be on standard.co.uk/sport. Can read everything I do there. But yeah, give us a follow. Always happy to interact with people, and fingers crossed we have an enjoyable season to cover.
Excellent, good stuff. And obviously, if we do not sign the player that you're all hoping for this summer, just tweet Simon and blame him, because that's what we do with all journalists. So we got to pick someone else. So who better than to do it than Simon? So it's been a pleasure, mate. Obviously, we speak pretty much every day on WhatsApp groups and stuff, but it's been really cool to have you kind of in a live setting, and hopefully it gives people a bit of an insight and a look behind the curtain at the world of journalism, because I know a lot of people like to think they know a lot about it, but they probably don't. So really good to chat to you, mate, and really enjoyable to get some of your stories. So thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you for having me on. I've been very much enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, that is the end of episode 3 of ABW in Conversation with. I have been your host, Kris. Simon has been my guest, of course. Tune in for more. We will be doing a couple more of these before the season starts. A couple of other guests lined up. Some you might know, some you might not know, but you have to tune in to find out more. So thank you very much for listening, for viewing, for downloading, for doing all that good stuff. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and follow us, and ding Danny's bell and all of those things. I don't know, algorithms, something like that. I'm not the tech guy here. I just get the guests. That's what I do, and I just talk. So please do give us a follow and a like, etc., and so on. And until the next one, thank you very much to Simon for his time again, and thank you all for joining us, and we'll speak to you very soon.